Well, good morning. This is Anthony Perrin coming to you live. Today is Wednesday, June 12th, and it is 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Been looking forward to this one, and it sort of basically answers my often frustrations when I'm looking at a tax treaty and just looking at it, looking for some relief for my clients, getting teased that there might be relief, but then finding no, there's no relief, and wondering why any country would enter into a tax treaty with the United States of America. These are not symmetrical agreements. And one of the big reasons why is, well, the United States has citizenship-based taxation, and every other country in the world that would sign a treaty does not. So there's sort of an inequity to begin with. And that could be a reason why you really want to avoid entering into tax treaties into the US. And we're going to explain exactly a little bit more into this. With me today is the great John Richardson. By the way, John, along with Karen Alpert and Laura Snyder, have their advocacy, and this just came out this week, and this is really exciting. Paul Karen, the tax prof, big guy on social media, he gave them 2 of the awards for the top 5 downloaded taxpayers. Congratulations, John! Wonderful work on that.
Anthony, actually, he's just reporting the SSR.
Oh,
it's okay. It's not like he's, an award. He's just reporting, the stats, right? So
well, don't take away your thunder. Don't take away your thunder.
It's still pretty damn good.
Yeah, that's incredible. The most down. That's amazing. Well, there you go. I mean, even better. Objective downloads. Wonderful. Congratulations on that. So, and just before we get going, I have a little bit of news that I share right here. You might notice a little something different there. Iris Medic is continuing. We're going to continue all the way, but I have joined. My firm has joined a larger firm, and now we are the tax division of Thaveau and Partners. Olivier Thaveau came out a couple of weeks ago. We talked, and we really get along. I was down in the New York office on Monday. Beautiful place right on Broadway. Noticed train traffic much down. I haven't gone to the city since before COVID, so there's a lot of room, not so crowded. So amazing news there, and I'll have more for that as we're going on. And with me today is Keith Redmond, the Consulate 2 advocate for Americans overseas, and you can find his Facebook group. We'll get to that at the end. Somewhere I'll have that at the end. And also, as I mentioned before, the great John Richardson of citizenshipsolutions.com really has helped me so much and helped so many others really get a credible foundation. I think in education better than law school in many ways. Here's where the rubber meets the road. Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us today. And you have a little bit of a presentation for us. We're going to go over, you have a couple Twitter threads we'll go through, and we'll explain why no country should ever enter into a tax treaty with the United States of America. So where should we start, John?
Well, this is in the context of treaties in general. So why don't we start with the, and where you see this very prevalently is, of course, tax treaties, where we'll spend most of the time talking. But I think a good introduction to this is actually extradition treaties. Okay. Because they're very, very similar in that they're both designed to project U.S. law into other countries. Okay. Extradition treaties are not what most people think they are at all.
Why is that?
They're not really about somebody committing a crime and where you live in Connecticut and scampering out of the country, although it might include that. Tax treaties have evolved to the point where they now operate so that there's sort of a club of members who sign these extradition treaties. And if somebody's wanted who happens to be in any one of these territories, regardless of where the crime is committed, and almost regardless of what the crime is, they may have an extradition problem. So let's actually begin with that, because, if you look at it right, so these extradition treaties, the U.S. sort of kicks down the doors and says, we want the whole world to obey our version of criminal law, whatever. And, if you're not a U.S. citizen and you don't live in the United States, and frankly, if what you did wasn't even the country where we're making the extradition request, we still want to bring you in.
Well, John, maybe you could, because I can go with the conventional wisdom of what I'm taught an extradition treaty is, and maybe part of me still thinks this, an extradition treaty is that if something's a felony in both countries, that means you can be yanked back to the other country. Is that's true, but that's not really what they are?
Well, it would include that.
Okay.
It would include that. But I mean, it's enormously broad, and all we have to do as we go through the thread is look at some of the stuff that's going on today. And also how these things, I think, are being used way beyond their intended purpose, to settle commercial disputes, for example, in the case of Michael Lynch. And they also have inequities in them,
Yeah.
specifically the UK treaty, very much like the FATCA IGAs. Okay, so anyway, I don't want to overdo it on the extradition, but I think that extradition treaties provide a very, very good foundation for sort of treaties in general. So let's start with extradition treaties.
Okay. And let's see. And
that was the first thread.
Oh, the first one. Great. Okay, let me get this one up. All right, so here we are. This is a great little picture you have here, representing the U.S. aspirations towards territorial expansion. By 1998, U.S. treaties had become, along with military force, instruments of expansion of U.S. laws into other countries. Again, we're not just talking about tax. We're talking about everything. Examples include tax and extradition treaties. And there's the mighty eagle covering its wings to protect all these poor, unfortunate people who haven't had the liberation of the U.S. empire. Here that is this eagle, which is looking a little bit like a turkey vulture there, having some problems, is over, it has its territory over the U.S. And it looks like there's even a map of, here, we're over part of the United States of America too. So interesting, 10,000 miles tip to tip, and that was nothing, right? That was nothing. Now that eagle covers the world.
Well, it's interesting that was 1898, right? That's more than 100 years ago, that cartoon. Also notice Puerto Rico, and I mentioned that because last week we talked about Puerto Rico. I didn't mention last week about Puerto Rico, I'll just kind of slip this in, is that the basis for the differential tax regime for Puerto Rico is, again, designed to benefit U.S. corporate interests, multinationals. And this is, like the foreign earned income exclusion and, all these types of things, right? But anyway, moving on here.
All right.
Now, in 1996, President Clinton, France and the United States entered into a new extradition treaty. Okay. And what I found interesting was every time, as you may know, that a treaty has to be signed onto by the Senate and it gets presented by the president. But what's very interesting is that President Clinton made some comments about the extradition treaty. And if you scroll up a little bit, I think they're, down rather. I think they're honest in the sense that, take a look at what his comment is. The United States recognizes the extraterritorial application of many of its criminal statutes and frequently makes requests for fugitives whose criminal activity occurred in foreign countries, adding with the intent, actual or implied, of affecting the United States. It's the first part that's I think most interesting, right? It's a clear acknowledgement that the purpose, maybe not the purpose, but a principal purpose of these extradition treaties is to export U.S. law into other countries. Would you say there's a similarity between that and U.S. citizenship taxation?
Oh, wow. John. Yeah. There it is. Yeah.
Continuing on.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just, it's sort of breathtaking to read that. The United States recognizes the extraterritorial application of many of its criminal statutes. And you stop right there. And there it is. The United States controls the world. There it is. There's no.
Well, they're taking the position they can enact laws that apply to anybody in the world.
Anybody in the world, right? That's our intent. Is that the U.S. law applies to anybody in the world?
Yeah, and they're using extradition treaties to enforce that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not making this up.
No.
I walked into a bar and started talking. They think I was on drugs. This is why I've given you the screenshot of Clinton's quotation
Yeah. Yeah.
right then and there in 1996.
That is
Okay, there's
shocking.
no question about this.
That is shocking. All right.
Okay, now there are some people. Now, the US UK extradition treaty is very unbalanced. It reminds me of the FATCA IGAs for reasons that I'll get to in a minute.
Imagine that, right?
But there are certain British lawmakers, one of whom is British MP David Davis, who I've never met, but I, obviously I've never met, but I've seen a lot of his stuff on YouTube. And there's no reason to get into the YouTube things right now. But for those who are interested, his comments are incredibly interesting about both how these treaties are being used, how they're unfair in the sense that there's no sort of inequality, and how they really need to be revised. And that's a short video clip that I would invite people to look at if they're interested. Next.
Right on. And there it is. And I could just see the teaser there. 97% of cases brought to the United States ends in conviction. And that's because our criminal justice system is a criminal justice system that you're denied. We have, if you actually think about the US code, how big it is, we often think about the tax code and then all the regulations and how big that is, but you have tax code, you have a US code on everything and regulations that go on, in eternity. And the complications, and that it's so difficult to challenge the government because the government will do shady things on you. They will, absolutely. They're the shadiest players around. And that's something to think about. Why should any country extradite anybody to the US when you know that the criminal process in the United States of America is criminal? Because its conviction rate speaks for itself. That I think that's in the pressure. And, it's the overcharging. Because when they say 97% of cases, well, 91% of tax cases end in a plea. So they're a plea, and that counts as a conviction. So that's when people have such an incentive to plea bargain because they know they won't get a fair trial, you have a criminal tax system.
Yeah, it's not a justice system. It's sort of a procedural system for
exactly.
It's what it actually is.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that there are a number of interesting cases here, but one of the ones that I find most fascinating, and this actually came to the end, it's in last week, is this Michael Lynch, who's a technology guy in the UK who created a company that he sold for billions of dollars to Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard, thought they were scammed in the deal, and
well, they might have been.
Maybe, okay, but but here's the thing, right? So this guy was sued in the UK, I think successfully, but the US used the extradition treaties. They charged him criminally to try to bring him to the United States, and they were successful in the extradition. Fortunately, last week he was acquitted in San Francisco. This is amazing. One of the very few people who was acquitted. But my point is, and this is what this MP David Davis repeats constantly, is that we have tremendous mission creep here. The U.S. is not using these things exclusively for criminal cases. They're using them to try to settle commercial disputes. We don't like what you're doing. We're going to extradite you, bring to America, and lock you up. It is disgusting.
Well, it's the logical extension of the American empire. The American empire, well, why did the American empire need to expand? The American interests overseas, as they were, right? Well, it's not American interests. It's certain people in America. Very few people in America have that interest, and that the rest of us must pay for. So it's all been, driving a lot of the expansionism of the American empire is the interplay between the corporate interests. And a lot of these corporations were doing, before there was a government to do these things, these corporations just paid to take over countries. They just hired their agents to take over a country. And so it's really just an extension of what the United States is and has been doing. Hewlett Packard's feelings were hurt because they didn't do their due diligence. That's my reading of it. And they wanted to find another way to get another bite at the apple of somebody who didn't do anything wrong, but they were embarrassed and wanted to cover their tracks and to excuse their own, probably laziness, quite frankly. So they used a system, they used what the American empire is built for. This is what it was built for from its inception, was built for to favor certain interests and to punish other interests. That's what exactly it is. From 1791, the first act signed into law, the excise tax of 1791. It was designed to help Washington's buddies and to hurt his enemies, and he certainly did. So it's not surprising, I would say. It's the United States of America has had a long history of exactly this. All right, so let's go down here.
Another great video. We're not going to click on it, but just for anybody who's interested. One of the cases that's had a lot of discussion recently is this Harry Dunn thing. As you may know, listeners may know, Harry Dunn was killed by Ann Sekulis driving a car. Ann Sekulis supposedly was a CIA employee. I don't know. Anyway, a government employee on the military base. That part is clear. But the interesting thing is that after killing Harry, she sort of scampered back to America, to avoid, getting mired into the British court system. Now, in the context of claiming the right to extradite Michael Lynch for a commercial matter, the U.S. refused to extradite Ann Sekulis to the UK, claiming some BS, diplomatic exception or something. Now, I want to pause here. And, we've talked about interpreting treaties in the past. The Vienna law on, this Convention for Treaty Interpretation clearly states these things are to be interpreted in good faith. And, both Michael Lynch and Ann Sekulis are clear evidence of bad faith on the part of the United States. Clear evidence. Anyway, next. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the inequality. All these extradition treaties are different, although they overlap. But the UK one is very interesting. I'll go down a little bit so we can see all of Article 8. Article 8 of the treaty, this is it, okay. Article 8 of the treaty lays out, how you extradite somebody and what you have to do. And, through diplomatic channels, and they have to be supported by, obviously information, but continue going down a little bit. Let's go to 8.3. Stop.
8.3?
Yeah, stop there. Now, in addition to the requirements in paragraph 2, which we just looked at, a request for extradition of a person who is sought for prosecution shall be supported by, A, a copy of the arrest warrant, B, a copy of the charging document. But take a look at C. And pause for a minute. Let's read this carefully. For requests to the United States, in other words, the UK is asking the US to extradite somebody, such information as would provide a reasonable basis to believe the person sought committed the offense for which extradition is requested. Now, you may notice that that's a requirement on only the UK.
Right.
There's no such requirement on the part of the United States in the treaty at all. In effect, now there may be other legal provisions that would govern this, but focusing only on the treaty, in effect, allowing the US to extradite anybody in the UK by meeting only the requirements of paragraph 2 and 3A and B. In other words, there's no requirement whatsoever of the U.S. trying to, having to provide a reasonable basis, which commentators equate this with probable cause. But anyway, to believe the person sought committed the offense. And that's pretty incredible stuff, right? It's just like the FATCA IGAs, right? Where, a country has to provide all this information to the United States regardless, but what does the U.S. have to do in return? Well, nothing.
Nothing.
So I'm gonna be intentionally ignorant on this with this question.
Here you go.
Why would the UK enter into such an extradition treaty with that particular provision? Are they forced into entering in it?
No, they're not forced.
Yeah.
So the history on this goes back to 2003, and it was after 9/11. And this whole thing was sort of, pitched as, oh my God, we have to find a way to go after terrorists, etc. But I can tell you that, and of course, for a brief period after 9/11, there was a lot of sort of solidarity and, to support the United States. But it's very, very clear, and I provided some links to some very good articles on this, that many people in the UK are very uncomfortable with this treaty. They think that it's, very unfair. Now, the UK government has, at least to date, declined to pull out of it. I think they should pull out of it. I think every country should pull out of extradition treaties with the United States because they're always giving up way more than they're getting. That's the problem, right? They may get something, right? But the question is, how much are they willing to give up for this? And one of the other very interesting things about this particular treaty is that it specifically says that the person's citizenship is irrelevant. Now, the reason that's important is that a number of treaties with civil law countries bring citizenship into it. For example, I'm not 100% sure on what I'm about to say, but there are countries who will not extradite their own citizens. Okay, I believe France may be one of them, but that's immaterial. There are countries who will not extradite their own citizens. What this has done is made it clear that citizenship is irrelevant. I think also demonstrating, once again, the absolute contempt that the United States has for its individual citizens.
Yeah. I think also, John, if I'm not mistaken, EU countries who have extradition treaties with the United States will not, how do I say this, will not abide by it if the individual is going to be brought up on where capital punishment is on the table. They won't extradite the individual unless a promise is made by the United States.
That's under this treaty as well. Yeah, that's a common feature of these treaties. But I think a lot of people would prefer to be killed, than have to live with. For example, you'll look at the Julian Assange situation, right? But anyway, the basic point here is this: not so much extradition treaties, but these extradition treaties are ways of projecting U.S. law into other countries. Okay, are you with me on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Keith, you answered the question. Why the question? Why do these countries enter into these treaties? And I think you said the answer in your question, and because you said, why are all these EU countries signing these treaties?
Yeah.
Well, you need to know who created the EU. Who created the EU? And it was the United States of America.
Well,
the United States of America has influence over the people signing the treaties, and that is the most likely explanation, as these treaties are clearly against the interests of their own citizens. I do believe it's the American influence.
I guess I was just kind of curious what the stick is, because on the FACTA IGAs, it's that 30% withholding penalty. So I was kind of wondering, just because I don't know, what is the stick with these extradition treaties if they don't sign on?
Oh, yeah, good question. Right, because the way they've enforced FACA is they've threatened to intercept those outbound wires to foreign financial institutions, basically ending them. Basically, when the U.S. is the mostly the world's reserve currency, for now it is at least. It's right. That's what they have. So I guess that's the thing. What is the thing that the United States of America has to punish those who don't enforce it? Right? Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of this stuff, if you were to present these treaties to some country today, I think they might look at them critically and decline. But, there's a certain habitual aspect of these treaties and momentum, right? In other words, this UK treaty was, an amendment of a previous treaty, et cetera, right? So, I think that with respect to these treaties, it sort of comes with, we have a treaty, there's a presumption, and now, we're going to try to tweak it, et cetera. I don't know. I think that also, I mean, I have a couple of times met people who, have been involved in treaty negotiations with, very small countries. And, they're really outgunned. Okay. When a small, poor country in general is trying to negotiate a treaty with a large, well-funded, first world democracy, I think that they should hire third-party consultants to
There you
represent.
go. All right, hang on a second. Well, hold on with that. You can reach out to John at citizenshipsolutions@proton.com. There you go.
Sure. Okay. Next.
Well, you know what? And John, I really appreciate what you're doing here by having us focus on extradition treaties first. This is now the right frame that I should be in, because now I'm actually frightened. I'm actually frightened now to take a look at these tax treaties, because now understanding, because the problem with tax treaties is they're dealing with tax and they get complicated, and most people have a hard time following along. But with the extradition treaties, we're talking about something a little bit more straightforward, that's a little bit easier to digest, and you see it, plain as could be, that this is a one-way. These treaties are one way. Everything flows into the U.S. Other countries, we'll give you whatever we feel like giving you on that day, but we're not bound by anything. And that's really the American way. And this is great idea, John. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's the problem. Keith, while I'm talking, could you look up, our friend Parvis threw up a comment. Look up Roman Polanski extradition. Do a search on that.
Yeah.
And get that organizing and let us know what you find in a second, okay? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Now, continuing on here, and this is really, has a bearing on, why countries do this. So, I mean, you've got a very, very credible body of legal and political opinion in the UK that, this treaty is absolute bullshit and it needs to go. But of course, the government goes out and gets its own so-called experts. And so here we have, just by contrast, right? We have a recommendation that this is absolutely insane. And then we have the government's response that no, we're just going to keep it, et cetera. So it's hard to dislodge this stuff, the unfairness notwithstanding. But anyway, continuing on here.
The government response is the government agrees that the treaty is not unbound.
Yeah, in other words, they went out and they got their own, personal review.
And this is,
hi, we want you to review this. And the conclusion we want, by the way, is that the treaty's not unbalanced. Okay.
Right. And I mean, I'm just going to say this is because of U.S. influence. This is U.S. influence over the government of the U.K. That there's no other reasonable explanation.
I mean, look at what this says here, right? And this is a government document. I'm not making
I mean, it's not unbalanced. It's not unbalanced. Anyone else think it's not unbalanced, right?
Create the treaty.
This is shameful. This
is
shameful. You are just, this is disgusting. You're clearly selling out your own people, and you're just like, it's not unbalanced.
No question. Okay, continuing here. Here's somebody again, just to make the point that not all is well with these extradition treaties. Okay, just continue on. I mean, there's a certain body of commentators who are, well educated, well informed, and understand these things, who take the position that this is ridiculous. Now, here's a very interesting one, a UK lawyer. Yeah, pause here. Writing. This is my summary. I think I'm right in terms of what he's saying. UK lawyer suggests US-UK extradition treaty improperly allows lack of reciprocity, which it clearly does, right? I mean, UK
it's right there.
Has this burden of proof that the US doesn't. And, my point is that this is very similar to the FATCA IGAs, right? This balance. Now, the other thing the other point I want to make to lead us in, to get us into the tax thing is that the effect of this, right? Now, let's pause for a minute. So all the U.S. has to do under Article 8 is essentially point to somebody and say, extradite that person. That's it.
You get extradited, you get extradited, and you get extradited.
You're going to be extradited in the United States, right?
Yeah.
How is this different from the U.S. claiming UK residents as U.S. tax residents? It's your lucky day. we decided you're a U.S. citizen, right? In other words,
Yeah.
there's huge similarity, right, between the underpinnings of at least this U.S.-UK extradition treaty and the whole extraterritorial tax regime. And I'll make the link, a little bit better as we go along, but just to plant the seed. Okay, continuing on. Now, just pausing here for a minute, just to give you a sense of the total bullshit of this. Okay, we have Dan Duggan, a guy in Australia who you may or may not know anything about. Right now, he's a former American citizen being extradited to the United States, allegedly training Chinese military pilots under a contract where he's paid in South Africa many years ago. Now, I want you to notice here that Australia, because it's in Australia, is being asked to extradite him. The conduct took place in neither Australia or the United States, but in South Africa. Let's move over to Julian Assange. We've talked about Julian.
Yeah.
By the way, July 9th is when his appeal begins, apparently, I heard yesterday.
Yeah.
We ought to do an IRS medic podcast from outside the court. But in any case, let's look at this again. Okay. And by the way, Dan Duggan is not a U.S. citizen. Okay. So here we have Julian Assange, not a U.S. citizen, being extradited to the U.S. from the U.K. for conduct that didn't take place in either the U.S. or the U.K. Interesting.
Correct. That is correct.
Meng Wanzhou, one that I've had a lot of interest in because it took place in Canada. Meng Wanzhou was a Chinese telecom executive who was arrested by the Canadian government at the request of the U.S. government when she landed from Hong Kong, when her Hong Kong plane landed in Vancouver, British Columbia. And this was in my view totally outrageous. This is after Trump reneges on the the Iran deal, and then all of a sudden anybody who does business again with Iran is going to be sanctioned by the U.S. Right? This is a U.S. law only. There's really no equivalent in any other country. But what happened was that Ms. Wanzhou, at least this is the allegation, made a false written representation in a bank in Hong Kong to somebody in Iran. Okay. So in other words, this is in no way connected to the United States. So how do they connect this? Well, they argue that, surely in Canada, it must be a crime, to make false statements, right? Et cetera. So, I mean, that's the link that this thing was actually hung on. And, so your initial point, Anthony, about something being a felony in both countries, no, not at all. Okay. It has
Okay, there it is.
Facts that could lead to criminal prosecution, not necessarily in the same way. Now, these are,
is that helpful?
there are other ones. Okay, there are other ones. But these are three very recent, going on before our very eyes, contemporary examples where, one, we have the extradition treaties being used to project U.S. law outside the United States into other countries, to utilize extradition treaties with various countries to force extradition based on somebody being in their territory, even though the alleged crime had nothing to do with either country. And this is not good. Okay, not good. Partly because, the U.S. is using so much of this. And I think that, this resulted, of course, in 2 Canadian citizens being imprisoned in China for 3 years. I'm not taking a position on what their role was in China, but the point is this, that there are repercussions to these countries, right? Or to the citizens of these countries for, getting involved in this U.S. extradition discussion, right? And I think these are all outrageous examples. They're really outrageous.
Yeah, well, and I like Parviz's comment right here. And I think if you're looking for a demonstration of selling out your country, is allowing the U.S. dollar to become your world reserve currency. Because what you've done is now the U.S. gets to offload its excess dollars it creates. And so now all these other countries are paying for U.S. inflation. That's a great example of how bad these other countries are, falling over themselves to give everything away to the United States empire, falling over themselves. They can't wait to do it. So, and by the way, if you're joining us live, we are finishing up our part one of our presentation today on about why no country should ever enter into a tax treaty with the U.S. And we also might change the topic of this to why no country should enter into any treaty with the United States of America. And specifically here, we're talking about extradition treaties, laying the groundwork of some clear, overt, basic examples of how countries give away their rights and hand them off to the U.S. for whatever the United States' interpretation is. So here we are. We haven't talked about tax yet. We're going to get into that. Right. But that's the foundation. We see that now. Keith, what would you add to this?
No, I was just going to say just further, because I was just doing a little research on the Roman Polanski. So would Roman Polanski be more the exception to the rule vis-a-vis the extradition? Because it has been denied over and over by France, by the Polish Supreme Court, by Switzerland.
I don't know a lot about the Roman. I'm aware that there's an issue. I don't know what the issue is, but I'm guessing, was the issue based on citizenship, that they would not extradite a national? Was that what it was, or was it?
Well, for France, that is true, because he's a Polish and French citizen. And when he left the United States, he went to France, and France will not extradite citizens of its own country, of France. Okay. Except under extraordinary circumstances.
There you go, Keith. I think you just answered it there. Except under exceptional circumstances, and I think honestly, the reason why Roman Polanski hasn't been extradited is because the United States government doesn't want him extradited. But if they wanted him,
they do want him, and they keep on trying to go after him. I mean, the latest was a few years ago in Switzerland. But I think these countries saw that he really got screwed in the United States when he got wind. Roman Polanski got wind from the judge, that the judge was going to renege on the deal that was made with prosecutors to only serve a minimum amount of time in prison. I think like 40-something days. And the judge had said privately, but it got out, that he was going to renege on that agreement. So that's when Roman Polanski got on a plane and went to France. So I think, the Poland and the Switzerland and France said, no, he's done his time. That's it. He got screwed. He was going to get screwed by the U.S. Justice system. Well, that was the common thought pattern, if you will, from those three countries.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to get into too much into that. I'm not going to hold out Roman Polanski as a testament for somebody. I mean, what he did was pretty bad.
Okay,
right. It was, having sex with a minor. Yeah.
The key point is that citizenship can matter in extradition. Right.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say this in odd situations that don't quite make sense. Why some people don't have to worry about it than other people do. So I would say this: we could there's a certain arbitrariness to this.
Right.
That's what I think we could agree on. All right, so should we move over to the other thread now, John?
I think, is there anything? I think I added one or two things. Just see if there's anything else.
No, that's it. That's it. Yeah, boys. Okay. So now we're going to move over to your other thread. Now this is now we're getting to tax treaties here with that foundation. And I think it's
okay. I think it's summarize this before we go through. Through this tweet sequence. Okay. Now, generally, right, and why do we start with extradition treaties? Because the purpose of these treaties includes, maybe not exclusively, but clearly includes a mechanism for the U.S. to project U.S. law into other countries. There's no doubt about that. Clinton himself says this, right, in '96.
Right, exactly.
Now, the point I want to make here is that nowhere is this more true than under the Internal Revenue Code. Because the combination, right, and interaction of U.S. citizenship taxation, FATCA, which is not so much used to enforce the taxation as it is countries help the United States discover, uncover, and report the existence of U.S. citizens who are living in their country. Finally, tied together with a provision of all U.S. tax treaties called the Saving Clause, where the other country, this is shocking, actually agrees that the United States has the right to impose U.S. taxation, forms, and penalties on their own tax residents. Okay, now let's pause for a minute. At a bare minimum, regardless of your view of this, at a bare minimum, by signing a tax treaty with the United States, every country is agreeing to turn over a subset of its residents to the United States for taxation and forms, penalties, etc. And before we go further with this, I also want to add that under the FATCA IGAs, plain language in the definition section allows the United States and the United States alone to decide which of the residents of that other country are U.S. citizens or U.S. persons. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, these are indisputable facts. Now, let's run through and explain this further.
Oh my God, this is much, much worse than I thought. The problem is much worse than I thought, John.
It's way worse than most people think. Okay, now, running through this stuff. Okay, now, first of all, basically now let's start with U.S. domestic law. U.S. domestic law says that it says more than that, but for our purposes, any U.S. citizen, regardless of where they live in the world, is treated as though they're a resident of the United States. Okay, so we have a U.S. citizen in France and Germany and Algeria, wherever. Those, according to U.S. law, are U.S. tax residents, right? Now, this is a bit of a problem because, prior to recent years, there were all kinds of people who might be U.S. citizens, but nobody would know about them. And also remember that since the 67 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Aphorium that dramatically expanded the number of U.S. citizens living outside the United States, right, by basically saying the United States couldn't, forcibly expatriate them. There were even more, people who would qualify as U.S. citizens living outside the United States. So that's the starting point. We've got all these, I think of them now as escaped Americans. Okay? We've got all these escaped Americans living in other countries, but they should be paying taxes to the United States. That's the starting point, right?
There's your starting point. And John, you mentioned this before, and through truly a regulation, the United States of America can deem every person on the planet to be a tax resident of the United States of America, regardless of where they live, what their citizenship is, and never being in the U.S.
That's right, because the bedrock principle of the Internal Revenue Code is that every individual is subject to U.S. worldwide taxation. Every individual.
Every individual, and even though the term individual isn't exactly defined, but you're correct. Every individual.
Carve-outs, non-resident aliens, not, etc. But okay, let's continue on here. So that's from the domestic law, that's the starting point. Now, parenthetically, just so you know, not only does the United States tax its citizens abroad, but it imposes a separate and more punitive tax system on them. Continuing on.
Yeah. So not only is the United States expanding its territory, as it expands, it gets more abusive.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, there's a punishment for escaping America, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's important also to understand that citizenship taxation at its core is taxation based really on the circumstances of your birth, who you are, the circumstances of your birth, and not really where you live, the circumstances of your life, right? I mean, that's really interesting, right? So it's who you are, not having anything to do with your life. That's the fundamental principle of U.S. tax residency, which is completely insane. Next. Now, I am convinced that very few people understand what this even is. And, you get all these law professors who write these tax treaties, and, they refer to things like Cook versus Tate, and they, and they somehow they think this is okay. And so I've often thought that, first of all, citizenship tax, if somebody walked in and said that, nobody would really know what it means, right? So what I think is that the supporters of citizenship tax are people who have sort of an awareness of it and a belief that somehow it's related to patriotism, and it applies mostly to residents anyway.
They just change the name to Patriot tax. There we go. Right there.
An opponent of citizenship tax is somebody who actually understands what it means.
Yeah, well, I learned the way I learned about it. I learned I learned the phrase universal tax jurisdiction first. That's what I learned first, and then I learned citizenship-based taxation. Yeah. So, and then there's, and I would say, some people would say worldwide tax jurisdiction, but that's actually not accurate, because the United States government taxes income anywhere in the universe.
That's worldwide taxation, right? Versus that's what you pay.
Well, I'm just saying, profits that you make on Mars are taxable if you're a U.S. person, is the point, because it's in the universe.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, next slide. In 2010, the Obama administration created FATCA. The Democrats are 100% responsible for this, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Yep.
Why these Americans abroad continue to support the Democratic Party is absolutely beyond my comprehension.
Well, Stockholm Syndrome. There you go.
Probably. Remember I said that under the FATCA IGAs, the U.S. defines who's a U.S. citizen? Here's your proof. Here's your proof. Scroll down a little bit. Keep going to the end. Go right to the end. And look at the final language. Stop. This subparagraph shall be interpreted in accordance with the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. That's it.
Whoa.
The U.S. defines who's a U.S. citizen in that country. Shocking, isn't it?
Oh,
these idiots are signed. It's unbelievable to me. I don't think they know what they're signing. It's so stupid. Next.
No, I don't think they do know what they're signing, John, at all, because they don't have an understanding of what citizenship-based taxation really is.
I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Now, so far where we are with this, right? And there are people who disagree with me on this, but I'm right and they're wrong. Okay. Yeah. There are people who disagree. But the whole point is that what FATCA has done. Now, remember that under FATCA, these other countries, at their own expense, undertake to go out and uncover and find, anybody who might be a U.S. citizen and turn them over to the IRS. That's exactly what it is. Okay. So
it's just like a fugitive slave act, something like that.
Well, I've seen that analogy. That FATCA is directly analogous to the Fugitive Slave Act. Agreed. But anyway, so the point here is that you can see how, if we have a dormant citizenship taxation that's not operating at maximum effectiveness because the U.S. can't identify U.S. citizens, so we go out and get other countries to do it for us. But the problem is that because these are overwhelmingly tax residents of those other countries, what these countries are doing is turning their own tax residents over to the IRS.
Yeah, and their own citizens.
Yeah,
including their own citizens. Yeah,
often their own.
Right, and people who somebody. And again, well, here's an example. Somebody could be born in New York City, and they were born there and they left, and they could be 100% not a U.S. citizen because they were the son or daughter of a diplomat.
Right.
There's an exception. So, but guess who's getting the information? Well, we see a U.S. address here, so we're going to just assume we need all your information.
Yeah.
Right. A U.S. place of birth does not automatically mean you are a U.S. citizen. But I'll tell you what.
Anthony, that is true. But it creates an unbelievable presumption that's expensive to rebut. Take a look at the cartoon here.
All right. Oh, yeah. There we go.
They're just vacuuming up tax residents all around the world. It's not so much the money. The cartoon, this is a shout out to Helen Berggraf. Okay. She should redo the cartoon and have them sucking up people. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really,
and Uncle Sam looks a little too friendly.
Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, he doesn't look like he has an evil purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's pause here for a minute. and we're running out of time for me today. So let's focus here. Now, question is, why would any country put up with this? Okay, I mean, we know practically, we've got the reserve currency and that, but surely people would be saying, okay, I mean, is this enforceable, right? Now, what's interesting here is it's the tax treaties that actually enforce it, because under the tax treaties, the treaty partner country agrees that the U.S. can come in and tax U.S. citizens without regard to the treaty.
Yeah.
Now, click on that so we can see the full text of it, Anthony.
This right here?
No, the image. Click there. Okay. Yeah. Now these saving clauses are different in different countries. This is the Canada one. So we'll use this as an example. It's definitely representative. First of all, I want to look at what it says, and then I want to talk about what it means. Okay. And how I think it's very deceptively written. Now, except as provided in paragraph 3, those are some carve-outs to the saving clause, okay? The convention shall be construed, nothing in this convention shall be construed as preventing a contracting state from taxing its residents as determined under Article 4. Now, pause there for a minute. You would think that would include U.S. citizens, right, who are resident, you would think. But look at where it goes from here. And notice it says in the case of the United States, not the other way around, in the case of the United States, its citizens, including a former citizen, blah, 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 blah. Now, let me strip that down to what it really says. Okay, it says as follows. No matter what else the treaty says, the United States has the right to impose its full taxes, forms, and penalties on anybody in the country who's a U.S. citizen. That's it. Okay? So here we have a situation where, we start off in the beginning, there was the U.S. Internal Revenue Code that applied to everybody in the world, but they saw that they didn't know who these people were. Then they introduced FATCA, which was a wonderful thing because not only would other countries find U.S. citizens for us, but they'll do it at their own expense, right? So
right. And and that's, and I would just say, I want to answer this question really quick. What choice do foreign financial institutions have when they're penalized by having 30% of U.S. source payments withheld if they don't comply with FATCA? Well, exactly. I don't think they have a choice because the country sold them out. I mean,
true, but it has nothing to do with the point here.
Okay.
All right. So then, the final point here is the saving clause ties it all together, right? Where in effect, the treaty partner country agrees under the treaty, okay? Which means they have now agreed that this is now elevated from being U.S. law, U.S. policy, to being a country agreeing to allow the United States to come in and essentially capture their own residents as U.S. tax residents. Now, doesn't that sound a lot to you like the UK-U.S. extradition treaty?
It sounds incredibly. Wow. It's as if they're written by the same people.
Okay.
Imagine that.
That's the basic point here. And I got to go in a second. Okay. Are there any other important ones? Yeah. Well, there's the conclusion, right? Why in God's name would anybody enter into a tax treaty with the United States when the minimal cost of it is to turn over a subset of your own residents to the United States? So, I mean, I think that the world collectively needs to get together and terminate these treaties. I mean, I think that we ought to do a podcast on what are the benefits, and if these treaties continue, what they need to be added to the saving clause is, in no case should this be applied to somebody who's a tax resident of our country. Okay, that's what's required. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily intentional, but it is the result of, small tweaks to treaties over the years without any reconsideration of the underlying purpose and effect. Also, I did a podcast, Karen Alpert, on this a while ago that lays this stuff out in perhaps more detail. But Anthony, I've got to go.
Okay.
For today. So any final anything else you want?
No. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation, John. I think that we all can understand, how the United States is on extradition treaties is how it is on tax treaties. And any country having a treaty with the United States really should revisit everything they're doing and get out of them as soon as they can for the protection of their own borders and their own citizens, and really of the world from the U.S. empire.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I think that is correct. That is correct. I mean, I don't see. I mean, one can say, well, all treaty partner countries benefit from the treaty, but when the benefits are so one-sided, and when one country has to literally surrender a percentage of its tax base to the United States, I think that this has to come to an end. Now, final thing I want to say today is this, okay? There's only one solution to this problem ultimately, and that is to completely sever U.S. citizenship from U.S. tax residency, joining the world in what residence-based taxation really is. Residence-based taxation is not, well, let's keep citizenship taxation, but citizens brought a better deal. That retains citizenship taxation. There's only one solution to this that will work for people, all the time, under all circumstances, and that is to completely sever citizenship from tax residency, and that needs to be the legislative goal so that all people leave from the prison of citizenship taxation together at the same time forever.
I love it, John. All right, I'll let you go. And if you are looking to renounce, you can reach out to John at citizenshipsolutions@proton.mail.com. John, I'll let you go, and I'll finish up with Keith here if you need to go. And if you are interested, hi Keith, it's you and I again. So we will finish up. If people are interested in talking to you about, VACA gets a lot of people interested in getting the U.S. compliance. And should someone reach out to a U.S. tax firm first, Keith? What do you think?
Well, I think, that's why I've worked with a lot of people, because I think all options need to be explored first.
Right.
Sometimes you need to get into the U.S. tax system, sometimes not. And I'm kind of like the first stop, if you will, for many people to really take a look at what is your short-term and long-term strategies. And you really need to explore.
Oh, we lost you, Keith. Oh, I lost Keith. Oh, here he's back. Here he came back. We lost you for a second there, Keith.
Yeah, sorry. What part did you lose?
People need to make an informed decision. One size does not fit all.
Exactly, and they need to explore all their options.
Right, all your options. And so, one of the things is, that's why we have people reach out to Keith. First, you can go to US_overseas_advocate@outlook.com, reach out to Keith and just sort of explain your situation to him. And he can sort of give you the reality on the ground, as it were. And so inform you what other people are doing. He is not a U.S. tax professional and is not so bound by Circular 230, just more information. He's a great source of fantastic information.
Right, and take a look at what your strategy is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, great. And if you are considering getting into U.S. tax compliance, for a lot of people, there's a reason why ignoring the IRS might not be the long-term best idea if you are looking to do that. I am at the Vo & Partners now, but you can still reach me in the same place at irismedic.com/offshore. Just go over there, and if you're interested in discussing your matter with you, also. We also have a tax division, a fantastic tax division to get your tax prep done. Also, you can go there as well. I want to thank John so much today. Yeah, did have to take off, and I want to thank all of our everyone participating today. Jack, thank you very much for your comments, and Blue Web, thank you. First time I've seen you here today. Thank you so much for commenting. Jack Dack, you said hi at the beginning. Thank you so much, and Parviz, thank you so much for everything you're doing. And Ronald, appreciate that. So everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. We will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when we're going live. Thanks so much for joining us today.